The marriage proposal came with a loaded gun on the table and 6 hours until sunset. Celeste Ashcroft hadn't eaten in 2 days when she knocked on the door of Iron Hollow Ranch, begging for work. The man who answered, tall, weathered, dangerous, looked her over once and said, "I don't need a worker. I need a wife. Decide before dark." She thought he was insane. He thought she had no choice. Both were right. What happened next would turn a desperate bargain into a fight for survival against men who burned homesteads and buried their mistakes in the desert. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The dust hadn't settled on Celeste's boots before she realized this was a mistake. Iron Hollow Ranch sat in the kind of landscape that looked like it wanted you dead. All sun-bleached stone and thorny scrub, stretching out under an Arizona sky so blue it hurt to look at. The main house was bigger than she'd expected, 2 stories of rough-cut timber that had gone gray from weather, with a wide porch sagging on one side. Outbuildings scattered around it like dropped dice. Horses moved in a corral, their tails flicking at flies. Somewhere a windmill creaked, metal on metal, the sound lonely enough to make her chest tight. She'd walked 3 miles from town. Her feet were blistered. Her dress, the only one she owned that wasn't falling apart, was soaked through with sweat and stuck to her back. The carpet bag she carried held everything she had left in the world: 2 changes of underclothes, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, a book she'd read so many times the spine had cracked, and a silver locket she couldn't bring herself to sell even when she was starving. She was starving now. 2 days since her last real meal. 3 weeks since the boarding house in Tucson had thrown her out for missed rent. A month since the position she'd traveled west for, promised in a letter, guaranteed and paid, had vanished the moment she arrived. The woman who'd hired her had looked at Celeste's fine Eastern manners and clean fingernails and laughed. "You think you can survive out here? Go home, sweetheart." Except there was no home. Not anymore. Her father's debts had taken the house in Philadelphia. Her mother's death had taken everything else. Her older brother had made it clear she wasn't welcome, not with his new wife and her expensive tastes. Celeste had exactly $4 to her name and a train ticket she'd already used. Going back wasn't an option. Going forward wasn't either. So when she'd heard about Iron Hollow, a ranch outside of town, always hiring, desperate for help, she'd swallowed her pride and started walking. Now she stood in front of the main house trying to look like someone worth employing. The door swung open before she could knock. The man who stepped out was not what she'd expected. Tall, yes, well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested hard labor, not leisure. But it was his face that made her breath catch. Not handsome in any conventional sense. His features were too rough for that. All sharp angles and sun-dark skin, a jaw that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. A scar ran from his left temple down past his cheekbone, thin and white. Old enough to have faded, but deep enough to have mattered. His hair was black, long enough to touch his collar, and his eyes were the coldest shade of gray she'd ever seen. He looked at her the way you'd look at a horse you were thinking about buying, assessing, calculating. Not unkind, but not warm either. "Help you?" His voice matched his face, low, rough, like he didn't use it much. Celeste straightened her spine. She'd been raised by a mother who believed posture could carry you through anything. "I'm here about work. I was told you might be hiring." "Were you?" It wasn't a question. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and kept looking at her with those unreadable eyes. She got the distinct impression he could see right through her, the desperation, the fear, the fact that she hadn't slept in a real bed in weeks. "I can cook," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Clean, mend clothes, keep books if you need it. I'm good with numbers. I worked for my father's business before." "You got people?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm sorry?" "People. Family. Husband, brother, father. Someone who's going to come looking if you disappear." Ice slid down her spine. Every story she'd ever heard about women vanishing in the West came flooding back. She took a half step backward, fingers tightening on her bag. He noticed. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. "Relax. I'm not going to hurt you. Just need to know if there's going to be trouble." "No," she said, lifting her chin. "No trouble. I'm alone." He studied her for another long moment. Then he pushed off the doorframe and stepped out onto the porch. Up close, he was even bigger, and Celeste had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Name's Rhett Mercer," he said. "This is my land. I don't need help with cooking or cleaning or mending. Got men who handle their own. What I need—" He paused, and for the first time she saw something almost like discomfort cross his face. "What I need is a wife." Celeste blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I don't understand." Rhett jerked his chin toward the land behind her, the vast empty stretch of rock and sage. "See that northern section, where the grass starts turning green? That's good land. Water runs through it year-round. Best grazing for 50 miles. My father filed a claim on it before he died, but he never proved it up. Law says I got 6 months to build a cabin, live on it, work it. Show the land inspector it's a real homestead." "I still don't see what that has to do with you?" He cut her off, but not unkindly. "Law also says a married man's got a better claim than a single one. Shows stability. Commitment. And there's a man in town, Silas Crow, who wants that land. He's got money, got influence, got the kind of connections that make judges nervous. He finds out I'm trying to prove up that claim alone, he'll throw every legal trick in the book at me. But if I'm married, he'll have a harder time," Celeste finished slowly. "That's right." She stared at him. "You want to marry me? A complete stranger, for a piece of land?" "Yes." "That's insane." "Probably." He didn't look bothered by the assessment. "But it's what I'm offering. You marry me today, help me prove up that claim, and you get a roof over your head, food in your belly, and your name on a deed that'll be worth something when this is all over. We do this legal, proper. You'll have rights." "Rights," she repeated numbly. "Your own room, your own money. I'm not asking you to—" He stopped, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You help me secure that land, and I make sure you're taken care of. Fair trade." Celeste's mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. Men didn't just propose marriage to women they'd met 5 minutes ago, except apparently in Arizona they did. "Why me?" she asked. "You could marry anyone. There must be women in town who— Most women in town have families asking questions. You said you're alone. That makes things simpler." Simpler. He said it like it was a business term, which she supposed it was. She should be offended. She should be horrified. She should turn around and walk back to town and figure out literally anything else. But her stomach was empty enough that it hurt. Her feet were bleeding inside her boots. She had $4 and no prospects, and winter was coming. "How long?" she heard herself ask. "How long what? How long would this marriage last?" Something flickered across Rhett's face, surprised maybe that she was actually considering it. "Long as it takes to prove the claim, 6 months minimum. After that, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll make sure you've got enough money to start over somewhere else." 6 months. Half a year playing house with a stranger in exchange for survival. She'd heard worse bargains. She'd lived worse bargains. "I need to think about it," she said. "You got until sunset." Rhett pulled a pocket watch from his vest, checked it, snapped it shut. "It's noon now. That gives you 6 hours. You say yes, we ride into town, find the justice of the peace, make it legal. You say no, you walk away, and we forget this conversation happened. And if I say no, you'll just find someone else?" "Eventually." He looked past her, toward that northern section of land, and his expression went hard. "But I'm running out of time. Crow knows it. He's already started making noise about contesting the claim. I need this settled before he gets a judge in his pocket." Celeste followed his gaze. From here she could just barely see it, a line of cottonwoods in the distance marking where water ran. Green in the middle of all this brown. Valuable. Worth fighting for. Worth marrying a stranger for. "Can I see it?" she asked suddenly. "The land?" Rhett's eyebrows went up. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to tie my name to it, I want to know what I'm getting into." For the first time, something almost like respect crossed his face. "All right, come on." He moved past her, down the porch steps and toward the corral. Celeste hesitated, then followed. What else was she going to do? The horses scattered when Rhett approached, all except one, a big roan gelding that came to him like a dog, nosing at his shoulder. Rhett scratched the animal's forehead absently, then grabbed a saddle from the fence rail. You ride? He asked over his shoulder. I did. Once. A long time ago. Good enough. He saddled 2 horses with the kind of efficiency that came from doing it 10,000 times. The second horse, a smaller bay mare, stood patient while Celeste tried to remember how this worked. She'd ridden in Philadelphia, in parks, on gentle paths. This was different. The stirrup was higher than she remembered. The saddle was worn smooth and smelled like sweat and leather, and something else she couldn't name. Rhett didn't offer to help. He just waited, holding the mare's bridle, while Celeste figured it out. She got her foot in the stirrup on the second try, hauled herself up, settled into the saddle with all the grace of a sack of flour. The mare shifted beneath her, and Celeste grabbed the horn to keep from sliding off. Rhett watched this with no expression at all. Then he swung onto his own horse like he'd been born there and turned toward the open land. Keep up, he said, and kicked the roan into a trot. Celeste swore under her breath and followed. The ride took 20 minutes, and by the end of it, Celeste's thighs were screaming. She'd forgotten how much riding hurt when you weren't used to it. Every step the mare took sent a jolt through her spine. Her hands were already blistering from gripping the reins too tight. But she didn't complain. She just clenched her jaw and kept going. Rhett didn't look back to check if she was following. He just rode, straight-backed and easy, like the horse was part of him. The land changed as they went north. The scrub gave way to grass. Not much, but enough to make a difference. The ground turned softer, less rocky. And then she saw the creek. It wasn't big, maybe 10 feet across, shallow enough to see the stones on the bottom, but it ran clear and fast, cutting through the landscape like a silver thread. Cottonwoods clustered along the banks, their leaves rustling in the wind. Birds called from the branches. Somewhere nearby, water bubbled over rocks. It was the most beautiful thing Celeste had seen since leaving Philadelphia. Rhett pulled up near the creek and dismounted. Celeste did the same, less gracefully, and nearly fell when her legs buckled. She caught herself on the saddle horn and took a moment to breathe. This is it, Rhett said. He stood at the water's edge, hands on his hips, looking out over the land. 200 acres. Some of it's rough, but the section near the creek is good, real good. Run cattle here year-round and never worry about water. My father knew that. That's why he filed the claim. Why didn't he prove it up? Rhett's jaw tightened. He got sick. Died before he could finish. There was more to that story Celeste could tell, but she didn't push. Where's the cabin? She asked instead. Not built yet. She turned to stare at him. You said you had to build a cabin to prove the claim. I did. I started one. He pointed west, where Celeste could just make out a dark shape against the horizon. Foundation's laid. Walls are half up. I've been working on it alone every spare hour I've got, but I'm not going to finish in time unless I get help. And Crow knows this. Yeah, he knows. Rhett's voice went flat. He's been watching, waiting for me to fail. Celeste walked closer to the creek and crouched down, trailing her fingers through the water. It was cold, shockingly so, and clean enough to drink. She could see why someone would fight for this. In a place where water meant life, this was a fortune. What happens if you lose it? She asked quietly. Crow takes it, adds it to his holdings, probably dams up the creek, redirects the water to his own land. Everything downstream dries up. Rhett paused. Including my ranch. So it wasn't just about one piece of land, it was about survival. His survival. Celeste straightened, wiping her wet hand on her skirt. She looked at Rhett, really looked at him, tried to see past the rough exterior, the cold eyes, the scars. Tried to figure out if this was a man she could trust. He stared back, unflinching. Why not just hire men to help you build? She asked. Why go through all this with a marriage? Because Crow's already spread stories about me in town. Says I'm violent, unstable. Says my father was a drunk and a cheat, and I'm worse. Half the men in town won't work for me because they believe it. The other half won't work for me because Crow pays better. Rhett's voice was still flat, but there was an edge to it now. Anger, maybe, or something deeper. A wife changes the story, makes me look stable, respectable, makes it harder for Crow to paint me as some kind of outlaw. Are you? Celeste asked. An outlaw? No. But you've done things, violent things. He didn't answer right away. Then, I've done what I had to do to keep this land. If that makes me violent, fine. But I've never hurt anyone who didn't come at me first. It wasn't exactly a reassuring answer, but it was honest, and Celeste found herself appreciating that. She turned back to the creek, watching the water move, trying to think through the impossible choice in front of her. Stay here, marry a stranger, help him fight a battle that might get her killed, or walk away. Go back to town with nothing. Hope something better came along before she starved. There was no good option, just two kinds of gambles. What do you get out of this? She asked, not looking at him. I mean, besides the land, why would you want a wife you don't even know? I already told you. No, I get the practical reasons, but there's got to be more. You could have asked anyone, paid someone in town to lie for you, hired an actress from Tucson. Why does it have to be real? Rhett was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked at him, he was staring at the cabin foundation in the distance. My father spent his whole life chasing dreams, he said finally. Always thought the next thing would be the one that worked out. The next claim, the next scheme, the next big score. He dragged my mother all over the West, moving every time things got hard. She died in a camp outside Silver City, sick with fever, no doctor for 50 miles. I was 12. Celeste's chest tightened. He kept moving after that, kept chasing. Ended up here 5 years ago and filed that claim, told me this was it, the last one, the one that mattered. He was going to build something real, something that lasted. Rhett's voice went rough. He died before he could do it. So I'm doing it for him, and I'm doing it right, legal, proper, no lies, no shortcuts. That means a real marriage, a real homestead, a real life, even if it's only for 6 months. Celeste didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood there in silence, the wind moving through the cottonwoods, the water running over stones. Somewhere a hawk cried out, high and lonesome. Finally, Rhett spoke again. Sun's burning. You need to decide. She did. She really did. Celeste closed her eyes and tried to imagine walking away, tried to picture herself back in town, knocking on doors, begging for work, sleeping in alleys, tried to imagine making it through another week, another month, another winter. She couldn't. When she opened her eyes, Rhett was watching her. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want it in writing, all of it, the room, the money, the terms. I want a contract that says exactly what this is and what happens when it ends. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. And I want to know everything. About Crow, about the land, about what we're up against. No secrets. Agreed. And if at any point I feel unsafe, if I think you're lying to me or putting me in danger, I walk away and you let me go. No arguments. Done. Celeste took a breath. Let it out. Made the decision that would change everything. All right, she said, I'll marry you. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Celeste's mind was racing too fast for conversation, and Rhett didn't seem like the type who needed to fill quiet with words. By the time they reached the main house, the sun was past its peak, starting that long slide toward evening. 4 hours until sunset. Rhett dismounted and handed his reins to a ranch hand who'd appeared from somewhere. The man was older, weathered as boot leather, with eyes that took in everything and gave away nothing. He looked at Celeste with curiosity but didn't ask questions. Charlie, get the buggy ready, Rhett said. We're going into town. Charlie's eyebrows went up. Town? Now? Now. You gonna tell me why, or... I'm getting married. Charlie's eyes went wide. His gaze cut to Celeste, then back to Rhett. You're what? You heard me. Get the buggy. Boss, are you out of your... Charlie. Rhett's voice went hard. The buggy. Charlie muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse, but he headed toward the barn. Rhett turned to Celeste. You should change, he said. If you got something better than that. Celeste looked down at her dress. It was her best one, but it was also covered in dust from the ride and soaked with sweat. Not exactly wedding attire. I don't, she admitted. This is all I have. Rhett frowned. For a moment she thought he was judging her. Then he jerked his head toward the house. Come on. She followed him inside. The interior of the ranch house was dark and surprisingly cool. Celeste's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a main room that was bigger than any parlor she'd known back east. Rough-beamed ceiling, stone fireplace large enough to stand in, furniture that looked handmade and worn but sturdy. Everything was clean but sparse. No decorations, no personal touches. It looked like a place where people slept and ate and not much else. Rhett led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. A hallway stretched out with 4 doors, all closed. He opened the one at the end. "This was my mother's room," he said, not looking at her. "She's been gone a long time. You can use whatever's in here." Then he left, pulling the door shut behind him. Celeste stood alone in the room, heart pounding. It was smaller than the rooms downstairs, but brighter, with a window that looked out over the ranch. A bed against one wall, a wardrobe against another, a small vanity with a cracked mirror. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust. She crossed to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside hung dresses that hadn't been touched in years. Simple things, calico and cotton, the kind women wore when they were working. But they were clean, carefully stored, protected from moths. Celeste pulled one out. Dark blue with tiny white flowers, long sleeves, high collar. It would have been fashionable 20 years ago. It would have to do. She changed quickly, fumbling with buttons, trying not to think too hard about the fact that she was wearing a dead woman's clothes to marry her son. The dress fit well enough, a little loose in the waist, a little short at the ankles, but serviceable. She found a hairbrush on the vanity and dragged it through her tangled hair, working out the worst of the knots. Pinned it up as best she could without proper pins. Looked at herself in the cracked mirror. A stranger stared back. Pale, thin, eyes too big and a gaunt face. But clean, at least. Presentable. She looked like a woman about to make a terrible mistake. Downstairs she found Rhett waiting by the door. He'd changed too. Clean shirt, dark vest, hat in his hands. He looked not comfortable exactly, but less like he'd just come in from working. He looked like a man preparing for something important. His eyes swept over her, taking in the dress. Something complicated crossed his face. "That was hers," he said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry if—" "No, it's good. She would have liked that." He cleared his throat, looked away. "Buggy's ready." They walked out together. Charlie had brought the buggy around, a simple 2-seater, weathered but functional. The horse hitched to it was the same bay mare Celeste had ridden earlier. Charlie himself stood holding the reins, looking like he had 100 questions and didn't dare ask any of them. Rhett helped Celeste up into the seat. His hand was rough and warm and gone as soon as she was settled. He climbed up beside her, took the reins from Charlie. "We'll be back before dark," Rhett said. Charlie nodded slowly. "Boss, you sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." And with that, Rhett snapped the reins and they were moving. The ride into town took longer than Celeste expected. The road was rough, rutted from spring rains and baked hard by summer heat. The buggy jolted over every stone, every dip. Rhett drove in silence, eyes on the road, jaw set. Celeste watched the landscape slide past. It really was brutal country. Beautiful in its own way, stark, honest, unforgiving. The kind of place that would kill you if you weren't careful. The kind of place where you could disappear and no one would ever find you. She was trusting her life to a man she'd known for less than a day. "Tell me about Crow," she said, breaking the silence. Rhett didn't look at her. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who he is, why he wants this land so badly, what he's willing to do to get it." Rhett was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse around a particularly rough patch of road. Then, "Silas Crow owns half the territory. Came out here 30 years ago with railroad money, bought up everything he could. Mines, land, water rights. Built himself an empire. Now he's old, rich, and mean as a snake. The North Pasture is the last piece he doesn't own between his holdings and the mountains. He wants it because he can't stand the idea of someone else having something he doesn't. That's it? Pride? Pride and water. The creek that runs through that land feeds into the river that runs through his property. He controls the creek, he controls everything downstream, including me. So this is personal. With Crow, everything's personal." Rhett's hands tightened on the reins. "He and my father had history, bad history. When my father filed that claim, Crow saw it as a challenge. When my father died, Crow figured the land would just fall into his lap. Except I didn't let it. That made him angry. Angry enough to be dangerous? Rhett finally looked at her. Yeah, angry enough to be dangerous. A chill went through Celeste despite the heat. Has he threatened you? Not directly. He's too smart for that. But his men have been seen around the property. Tools go missing. Fences get cut. Things catch fire. Nothing I can prove, but I know it's him. And you think marrying me will stop him? I think it'll make it harder for him to run me off without attracting attention. A single man losing his land is one thing. A married couple with a legal homestead is another. It changes the optics. Optics. Celeste almost laughed. They were playing a game where the rules kept shifting and the stakes were life and death. What if he comes after me? She asked quietly. Rhett's jaw clenched. He won't. How do you know? Because I'll kill him if he tries. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it was almost comforting. At least she knew where she stood. They reached town just as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. The settlement was small, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business. A few looked up as the buggy passed, curious. Rhett drove straight to a building near the church. A sign out front read, Justice of the Peace, Samuel Hendricks. He set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help Celeste. This time his hand lingered just a moment longer. When she looked at him, his expression was carefully neutral. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Celeste thought about it, really thought about it. Then she shook her head. I'm not changing my mind. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. All right then, let's get this done. They walked up the steps together. The justice of the peace was a thin, gray-haired man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his desk when they entered, took one look at them, and sighed. Rhett Mercer, he said, I heard you might be stopping by. Rhett's eyes narrowed. Did you now? Small town, word travels. Hendricks stood, wiping his hands on his vest. You're here to get married, I assume. That's right. And this is the bride? Celeste Ashcroft, Celeste said, finding her voice. Pleased to meet you. Hendricks gave her a long, measuring look. You sure about this, miss? You know what you're getting into? I do. Do you? Because Rhett here, no offense, Rhett, has something of a reputation. And getting mixed up in his business with Silas Crow could get complicated, dangerous even. I'm aware. Are you? Hendricks leaned forward. Because if you're being coerced, if there's any question about your willingness, I can't perform this ceremony. The law's clear on that. Celeste lifted her chin. I'm not being coerced. I'm making a choice. Maybe not a good one, but it's mine. Hendricks studied her for another moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. If you're both certain, I'll need witnesses. 2 of them. I'll find them, Rhett said, and stepped back outside. Hendricks turned to Celeste. You really sure about this, miss? No, Celeste admitted. But I don't have anywhere else to go. That's not a good reason to get married. It's the only reason I've got. Hendricks sighed again. Your life, I suppose. A few minutes later, Rhett returned with 2 men Celeste didn't recognize. One was young, maybe 20, with a nervous energy about him. The other was older, heavier, with the look of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. This is Tom and Bill, Rhett said. They'll witness. Hendricks gestured them all to stand in front of his desk. He pulled out a worn Bible and a document that looked like it had been used 100 times before. All right, he said. Let's make this quick. Rhett Mercer, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Rhett looked at Celeste. His gray eyes were steady, unreadable. I do. Celeste Ashcroft, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it. The moment. The choice that couldn't be undone. Celeste took a breath. I do. Hendricks nodded. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Rhett, you may kiss the bride if— No need, Rhett said quickly. Hendricks raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He pushed the document forward. Sign here, both of you, witnesses too. Celeste signed her name with a hand that only shook a little. Rhett's signature was bold, slashing. Tom and Bill added theirs. And just like that, it was done. Celeste Ashcroft was now Celeste Mercer. She'd married a stranger before sunset. and she had no idea if she'd just saved her life or destroyed it. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride in, darker too. The sun had dropped below the horizon by the time they left town, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that bled into black. Stars came out one by one, hard and bright in the desert air. Celeste sat rigid in the buggy seat, acutely aware of the man beside her, her husband. The word felt foreign in her mind, like something borrowed from someone else's life. She kept twisting the plain gold band Rhett had produced from his pocket. His mother's, he'd said, voice flat, around her finger. It was slightly too large and kept sliding toward her knuckle. Rhett hadn't spoken since they'd left Hendrick's office. He just drove, hands steady on the reins, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence stretched between them, not comfortable, but not hostile either. More like they were both trying to figure out what came next. Celeste broke first. What happens now? Rhett glanced at her. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and angles. Now we go home. Tomorrow we start on the cabin. That's it? What else were you expecting? She didn't know how to answer that. A wedding night, maybe, though the thought made her stomach twist. Some kind of ceremony or acknowledgement that their lives had just changed permanently. But Rhett didn't seem like the type who marked occasions with fanfare. I just thought there'd be more, she said finally. More what? I don't know. Something. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then, we made a deal. I keep my word. That's all the something there is. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it just made her feel hollow. They reached the ranch just after full dark. Lights burned in the windows of the main house. As Rhett pulled the buggy to a stop, Charlie appeared from the barn, lantern in hand. He took one look at them and shook his head. Well, you actually did it, he said. You went and lost your mind. Watch it, Rhett said, but there was no heat in it. Charlie helped Celeste down from the buggy, his weathered face kind despite his words. Welcome to Iron Hollow, Mrs. Mercer. Hope you know what you signed up for. I don't, Celeste admitted. But I'm here anyway. That got a surprised laugh out of him. Honest. I like that. Come on, I'll show you where everything is. Boss here ain't much for hospitality. Rhett unhitched the horse without comment. Celeste followed Charlie toward the house, glancing back once. Rhett stood in the shadows by the barn, watching her. When their eyes met, he looked away. Inside, the house was warmer than she'd expected. A fire burned in the main room's massive fireplace, and the smell of something cooking drifted from what she assumed was the kitchen. Charlie led her through the space, pointing things out as they went. Main room here, kitchen through that door, washroom in back. Upstairs is bedrooms. Boss already told you about your room, I expect. You need anything? You holler. We got 3 hands living in the bunkhouse out back. Me, Marcus, and young Jimmy. We keep to ourselves mostly, but we eat breakfast together in the kitchen, 6 sharp. 6 in the morning? Yes, ma'am. Ranch don't run itself. Celeste nodded, trying to absorb it all. It felt surreal, standing in this unfamiliar house, being called ma'am by a man old enough to be her father. Being married to someone she'd known for less than 12 hours. Charlie paused at the base of the stairs. Look, I don't know what arrangement you and the boss worked out, and it ain't my business, but I will say this. Rhett's a hard man, but he's a fair one. He don't lie, and he don't go back on his word. Whatever he promised you, he'll deliver. You can count on that. Why are you telling me this? Because you look scared, and I figure you got a right to be. But you also got a right to know what kind of man you just married. Before Celeste could respond, the front door opened. Rhett came in, hat in his hands, dust on his boots. He looked at Charlie, then at Celeste. She settled? He asked. Getting there, Charlie said. I was just explaining how things work around here. Good. Rhett moved past them toward the kitchen. There's stew if you're hungry. I'm going to check the books and turn in. And just like that, he was gone. Charlie sighed. Like I said, not much for hospitality. Celeste found herself fighting down a hysterical laugh. This was her wedding night. She was supposed to be. She didn't even know what she was supposed to be doing. But it certainly wasn't standing in a stranger's house, watching her husband disappear into a back room without so much as a good night. Come on, Charlie said gently. Let's get you some food. The stew was simple but good. Beef and potatoes and carrots, seasoned with salt and something else she couldn't identify. Celeste ate standing at the kitchen counter, suddenly ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a hot meal. Charlie watched her with the kind of quiet understanding that made her throat tight. "You can have seconds," he said. "Plenty more." She did. And thirds. By the time she finished, her stomach actually hurt from being full. It was the best kind of pain. Charlie showed her where things were: the pump for water, the pantry, the icebox. He explained the routine: breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at sundown. The hands would expect coffee before they started work. Someone needed to collect eggs from the chickens every morning. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Some." "Enough." "Good, because the boss sure can't. We've been living on stew and beans since his old housekeeper quit last month. Woman got tired of this isolation, headed back to Tucson. You taking over those duties would be appreciated." So that was her role here. Cook, housekeeper, wife in name only. Celeste had expected as much, but hearing it stated plainly still stung. "I'll do my best," she said. "That's all anyone can ask." When Charlie finally left her alone, Celeste climbed the stairs to the room Rhett had given her. Her room now, she supposed. The door was still open from earlier. Inside, someone had lit a lamp on the bedside table. The covers on the bed had been turned down. Celeste closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. She'd done it. She'd actually married a stranger for survival. And now she was standing in a dead woman's room, wearing a dead woman's dress, trying to figure out how to live a life that didn't feel like hers. The window looked out over the dark ranch. Somewhere out there was the north pasture, the creek, the half-built cabin. The land Rhett was willing to fight for. The land she was now tied to, whether she wanted to be or not. Celeste undressed slowly, folding the blue dress carefully and laying it over the back of a chair. She found a nightgown in the wardrobe, plain white cotton, worn soft with age, and pulled it on. Crawled into bed. The mattress was more comfortable than anything she'd slept on in months. The blankets were heavy and warm. She should have fallen asleep instantly. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Footsteps somewhere below. The creak of floorboards, wind rattling the windows. And somewhere in the darkness, her husband, who she didn't know and couldn't read, doing whatever mysterious things men did when they were alone. Celeste closed her eyes and tried not to think about how badly this could all go wrong. Morning came too early and too bright. Celeste woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices outside. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. She dressed quickly in another of the dresses from the wardrobe, brown cotton, practical, with buttons she could manage herself. Her own clothes were still in her carpet bag, but they seemed too fine, too Eastern, too much like the person she used to be. Better to blend in. Downstairs, the kitchen was already full of men. Charlie stood at the stove, frying eggs. Two others sat at the long wooden table, one young and wiry with red hair, the other older and dark-skinned with arms like tree trunks. They both looked up when Celeste appeared. "Morning," Charlie said cheerfully. "Boys, this is Mrs. Mercer. Mrs. Mercer, this is Jimmy and Marcus." Jimmy jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Ma'am." Marcus rose more slowly, nodding. "Pleasure." "Please sit," Celeste said, feeling awkward. "I don't want to interrupt." "You ain't interrupting," Charlie said. "You live here now. Coffee's on the stove, cups in the cabinet. Help yourself." Celeste poured herself coffee and sat at the far end of the table. The men went back to eating, but she could feel them watching her when they thought she wasn't looking, trying to figure her out. Rhett appeared a few minutes later. He looked like he'd already been up for hours. Hair damp, shirt clean, boots dusty. He grabbed coffee and leaned against the counter, drinking it black. "Morning," he said to the room at large. The men responded in kind. Celeste just nodded. "We're heading to the north pasture today," Rhett said. "Need to finish framing the cabin walls before the inspector comes next week. Jimmy, you're with me. Marcus, I need you to check the fence line on the western boundary." "Charlie—" I know, Charlie interrupted. "Hold down the fort." "Right." Rhett's eyes flicked to Celeste. "You should come." She blinked. "What?" "To the north pasture, see the cabin, figure out what needs doing." "I don't know anything about building cabins." "You'll learn." It wasn't a request. Celeste set down her coffee cup. "When do we leave?" 20 minutes. Dress for work." He left before she could argue. Marcus chuckled. "Boss don't waste time, does he?" Never has, Charlie said. You get used to it. Celeste wasn't sure she wanted to get used to it, but she went back upstairs and changed into the oldest dress she could find, one with sleeves she could roll up and a hem she wouldn't mind getting dirty. When she came back down, Rhett was already outside, loading tools into a wagon. The ride to the north pasture took half an hour. Celeste sat in the wagon bed with Jimmy, who spent the entire trip trying to make conversation and failing. He was nervous around her, she could tell, probably not used to having a woman on the ranch. When they reached the claim, Celeste saw what Rhett had meant about the cabin being half finished. The foundation was solid, good stonework, carefully laid. Walls stood about 5 feet high on 3 sides, rough-cut logs notched and stacked. But the fourth wall was barely started, and there was no roof. Tools lay scattered around the site. Lumber was piled nearby. It looked like a lot of work. Rhett jumped down from the wagon and started unloading. "Jimmy, help me with these beams. We need to get the back wall up today." "What should I do?" Celeste asked. Rhett paused, considering. "Can you measure?" "I can count." "Good enough. See those boards over there? I need them cut to 8 feet, 3 inches. Mark them with the chalk, and Jimmy will saw them later." It was simple work, mindless, but Celeste threw herself into it, measuring, marking, stacking. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became brutal. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her hands started to blister from handling the rough wood, but she didn't stop. Rhett and Jimmy worked on the walls, hauling logs, fitting them together, hammering them into place. They moved with practiced efficiency, barely speaking. The sound of their work echoed across the empty land. Wood on wood, metal on metal, the rhythm of building something from nothing. Around midday, Rhett called a break. They sat in the shade of the wagon, drinking water from a shared canteen, eating bread and cheese Charlie had packed. "You keeping up all right?" Rhett asked Celeste. "Fine. Your hands are bleeding." She looked down. He was right. The blisters had burst and her palms were raw. She hadn't even noticed. "It's fine," she said again. Rhett pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Wrap them. Infection out here will kill you." She took the cloth, their fingers brushing briefly. His hands were calloused, hard as leather. Hers were soft despite the damage. City hands. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Rhett frowned. "Doing what?" "Building the cabin yourself. You said Crow's men won't work for you, but there must be someone you could hire. Someone from another town, or—" "This has to be mine," Rhett interrupted. "My work, my sweat, my proof. If I hire it done, Crow will say I'm trying to cheat the claim, that I'm not really living here, not really working it. He'll use it against me." "So you're doing it alone?" "I was. Now I'm not." It took Celeste a moment to realize he meant her. She was part of this now. Part of the work, the fight, the gamble. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost like belonging. They worked until the sun started to drop. By then the back wall was up and secured, and the cabin actually looked like it might become something real. Rhett stood back, surveying their progress, and for the first time Celeste saw something like satisfaction on his face. "Good," he said. "Another few days like this, and we'll have it done." On the ride back, Celeste's whole body ached. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders burned. Her legs were shaky from standing all day. But there was also a strange sense of accomplishment settling in her chest. She'd done something, contributed, earned her place, at least a little. Rhett caught her eye from the driver's seat. "You did good today." It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. Celeste found herself fighting down a ridiculous smile. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow will be harder." He was right. The next day was harder. And the day after that. But Celeste kept showing up, kept working, kept learning. She learned how to swing a hammer without hitting her thumb. How to hold boards steady while someone else sawed. How to read the land, watch the sky for weather, understand the rhythm of the work. And slowly, grudgingly, she learned about Rhett. He was a man of routines. Up before dawn, asleep by 10. He drank his coffee black, ate whatever was put in front of him, and never complained. He worked like someone trying to outrun demons, pushing himself past exhaustion every single day. But he was also careful with the animals, gentle with the tools, meticulous about the work. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he meant it. There was no small talk, no idle chatter. Every word had weight, and he kept his promises. Celeste had her own room, her own space, her own money. He'd given her $20 the day after the wedding, told her it was hers to spend as she pleased. He never pushed, never demanded, never crossed the invisible line they'd drawn between them. It should have been enough. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when Celeste caught herself wanting more. Like when Rhett showed her how to properly grip a saw, his hand covering hers, his breath warm on her neck. Or when he smiled at something Jimmy said. A real smile that transformed his whole face. Or late at night, when she lay awake and heard him moving around downstairs, and wondered what he was thinking about. She told herself it didn't matter. This was temporary. A business arrangement. In 6 months she'd be gone and this would all be a strange memory. But the lie was getting harder to believe. 3 weeks after the wedding, the cabin was finished. Walls, roof, door, windows, all of it done. It wasn't fancy. The floor was hard-packed earth and the furnishings were sparse. But it was solid, weatherproof, livable, a real homestead. Rhett stood in the doorway, looking at what they'd built, and Celeste saw something she'd never seen before in his expression. Pride, relief, hope. "My father would have liked this," he said quietly. Celeste moved to stand beside him. "I think he would have been proud of you." Rhett glanced at her, something complicated flickering across his face. Then he looked away. "Inspector's coming Monday," he said. "We need to make it look lived in. Move some things out here, spend a few nights, show it's a real claim." "All right." "You don't have to if you don't want to. I can—" "Rhett," she cut him off. "I said all right." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. That weekend they moved supplies to the cabin. Blankets, cooking gear, food, a small table, and 2 chairs Charlie had found somewhere. It was basic, but it would pass inspection. Sunday night they had dinner at the cabin together. Celeste cooked over the fireplace, beans and cornbread, simple but filling. They ate sitting on the floor because the chairs weren't comfortable and the table was too small. "This is strange," Celeste said after a while. Rhett raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "All of it. A month ago I didn't know you existed. Now we're eating dinner in a cabin we built together, pretending to be a real married couple. We are a real married couple. You know what I mean." Rhett was quiet, chewing slowly. Then, "Yeah, I know what you mean. Do you ever think about what happens after? When the claim is proved and this is all over?" "Sometimes." "And?" He set down his plate. "And I don't know. I promised you could leave if you wanted. I meant it." "What if I don't want to leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Celeste hadn't meant to say it. It had just slipped out, raw and honest and terrifying. Rhett stared at her. "You said—" "I know what I said. I'm just—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Things change." Celeste. Her name sounded different in his voice. Careful. "This was supposed to be simple. A deal. You help me, I help you. We both walk away better off." "I know. Feelings complicate things." "I know that too." Rhett ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I can't give you what you deserve. A real marriage, a normal life. I don't know how to be that person. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not." "Then what are you asking?" Celeste looked at him, really looked. At the scar on his face, the gray eyes that had started to seem less cold and more just guarded. At the hands that built things, that worked until they bled, that had never once hurt her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe just a chance to figure it out." Rhett didn't answer. He just looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he stood, grabbed his bedroll, and headed for the door. "I'll sleep outside tonight," he said. "You take the cabin." "Rhett, it's fine. I'll see you in the morning." And he was gone. Celeste sat alone in the cabin they'd built, surrounded by the evidence of their work, and tried not to feel like she'd just ruined everything. The inspector came Monday morning, a thin official with spectacles and a clipboard who spent 2 hours examining every inch of the property. He measured walls, checked the foundation, asked questions about their intentions. Rhett answered everything calmly, showing documents, explaining the plan. Celeste stood beside him, playing the part of the devoted wife. She smiled when appropriate, nodded when asked direct questions, and tried to ignore the way Rhett wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Finally, the inspector made his notes and declared the claim valid. Provided you maintain residence here and continue working the land, this should be approved within 6 months. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer. They shook hands. The inspector left. Rhett and Celeste stood in front of the cabin in silence. Well, Rhett said eventually, that's done. Yes. More silence. Then Rhett turned to her. About last night. You don't have to explain. I think I do. He took a breath. This is all I know how to do. Work the land, keep my word, fight for what's mine. I don't know how to... He gestured vaguely. This, feelings, relationships. My parents didn't exactly model a good marriage. Nobody's parents did. That got almost a smile. I'm trying to be fair to you. If you stay, it has to be because you want this life, not because you're grateful or obligated or stuck. I won't keep you here if your heart's not in it. What about your heart? Celeste asked. Is it in it? Rhett looked away, jaw working. I don't know if I have one left to give. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and the saddest. Then I guess we're both taking a chance, Celeste said softly. Rhett's eyes snapped back to hers. What? I'm scared too. I don't know what I'm doing either, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not yet. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. The guarded look cracked, just a little. Why? Because I've spent my whole life running from hard things, and I'm tired of it. This, whatever this is, feels like something worth staying for. Rhett stared at her. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough against hers, warm and solid. All right, he said, we'll figure it out. Together. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was something, a beginning. Celeste squeezed his hand. Together. They stood there in front of the cabin, hands linked, while the sun climbed higher and the day stretched out ahead of them. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Iron Hollow, Celeste felt like she might actually belong here. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On Thursday, Marcus came riding in hard from the western fence line, his horse lathered and blowing. Celeste was in the kitchen when she heard the commotion. She ran outside to find Rhett already there, catching Marcus's bridle. What happened? Rhett demanded. Marcus slid from the saddle, breathing hard. Someone cut the fence. 20 yards worth, clean cuts. Not an accident. Rhett's face went stone. How many head got out? Didn't count. Maybe a dozen. I chased them back and did what I could to patch the fence, but boss. Marcus hesitated. There were boot prints. Fresh ones. Someone was out there this morning. Show me. They rode out immediately. All of them. Rhett, Marcus, Charlie, Jimmy, even Celeste, who insisted on coming despite Rhett's protests. By the time they reached the fence line, the sun was high and brutal. Marcus was right. The damage was deliberate. Wire cut clean, posts loosened, the gap wide enough to drive cattle through. And there, clear in the dust, were the boot prints. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Rhett crouched beside them, face grim. How long ago? Few hours, maybe. They're long gone now. Crow's men, Rhett said flatly. Has to be. Celeste felt ice in her stomach. What does this mean? Charlie answered before Rhett could. Means they're escalating, trying to provoke a response, make the boss look unstable so they can challenge the claim. Or they're trying to run us off, Marcus added. Rhett stood, fists clenched. They're not running us anywhere. But his voice was tight with anger, and Celeste saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. The same thing that must have earned him his reputation, the violence people whispered about. Rhett, she said carefully, what are you going to do? He looked at her, and for a moment she didn't recognize the man standing there. Then he blinked, and the mask came back. Fix the fence. Set watch. Make sure it doesn't happen again. It was the right answer, the smart answer. But Celeste wasn't sure he believed it. That night, Rhett disappeared into town. He didn't say where he was going or when he'd be back, just saddled his horse and left, his face set in hard lines. Celeste waited up, pacing the main room, trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. What if he confronted Crow? What if there was a fight? What if he didn't come back? Charlie found her around midnight, still awake, still pacing. "He'll be fine," the old hand said. "Boss knows what he's doing." "Does he? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like he's about to do something reckless." "Maybe. But he's been handling Crow longer than you've been here. He knows the game." "This isn't a game, Charlie. Someone could get hurt." "Someone already did. We just didn't bleed." Celeste turned to look at him. "What am I supposed to do? Just wait here and hope he doesn't get himself killed?" Charlie's expression softened. "That's what being married to a man like Rhett means. Trusting him to fight his own battles, even when it scares you." "I didn't sign up for this." "Yes, you did. Maybe not this exactly, but you knew what you were getting into. Rhett told you about Crow, about the land, about the stakes. You said yes, anyway." He was right. She had known, but knowing in theory was different from living in practice. Rhett came back just before dawn, smelling like whiskey and horse sweat. Celeste was dozing in a chair by the fire when the door opened. She jerked awake, heart pounding. "Where were you?" she demanded. Rhett closed the door quietly. "Talking to people." "What people?" "People who might know what Crow's planning." He moved past her toward the stairs. "It's handled." "Handled how? Rhett, you can't just—" "I said it's handled." His voice was flat, final. "Go to bed, Celeste." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, explanations, reassurances. But the look on his face stopped her. He was closing down, shutting her out, retreating behind walls she couldn't break through. So she went to bed, and lay awake listening to him pace the floor below, and wondered how long they could keep pretending this was going to work. The morning after Rhett's late-night return brought no answers, only more tension. He was gone before Celeste woke, and when she came downstairs, Charlie was already at the stove, looking troubled. "He took his rifle," the old hand said without preamble. Celeste's stomach dropped. "Where'd he go?" "North Pasture. Said he's staying out there for a few days, keeping watch." "Alone?" "Jimmy's with him, but yeah, mostly alone." Charlie cracked eggs into a pan with more force than necessary. "He's digging in, getting ready for whatever comes next." Celeste poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "This is going to get worse, isn't it?" "Probably. Crow don't like being ignored. And Rhett went into town last night, made some noise. Ask questions, let people know he ain't backing down." Charlie glanced at her. "That's going to make Crow angry." "What was he supposed to do? Let them destroy the fence and say nothing?" "I ain't saying he was wrong. I'm saying there's consequences." The consequences came faster than expected. 2 days later, Marcus found half the water trough at the main ranch drained and contaminated with kerosene. The smell was overwhelming, oily, and chemical. Every animal that had drunk from it was sick, and one calf had already died. Celeste stood in the barn with Marcus, watching him try to comfort a heaving cow, and felt rage building in her chest like a living thing. "How could someone do this?" she asked. Marcus looked up, his dark face grim. "Same way they cut the fence. They don't see these animals as living things. They see them as tools to hurt the boss. We need to tell Rhett." "Already sent word. He's coming back tonight." "Yeah, but Rhett didn't come back that night. Or the next. Instead, he sent Jimmy with a message scrawled on paper torn from a ledger. Stay at the main house. Keep everyone close. Don't go anywhere alone." Celeste crumpled the note in her fist. "He can't just hide out there and expect us to sit here waiting." "He ain't hiding," Charlie said. "He's protecting the claim. If Crow's men can't get to him, they'll come here, try to draw him out." "So we're bait. We're leverage. There's a difference." Celeste wasn't sure there was. She tried to keep busy, throwing herself into the ranch work with desperate energy. Cooking, cleaning, mending tack, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind from spiraling. But every sound made her jump. Every rider on the horizon made her reach for the rifle Charlie had insisted she keep nearby. "You know how to use that?" he'd asked when he handed it to her. "No." "Then learn." So she did. Marcus took her out behind the barn and taught her the basics: how to load, aim, fire, how to brace against the recoil so it didn't knock her flat, how to breathe through the fear and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. The gun was heavier than she'd expected, and louder. The first shot made her ears ring and her shoulder ache, but the second was better. and the third hit the tin can Marcus had set up as a target. "You're a natural," he said, surprised. "I'm terrified," Celeste corrected. "There's a difference." On the 5th day of Rhett's absence, a rider came. Not one of Crow's men, but someone worse. Crow himself. Celeste was in the kitchen when she heard the horse. She looked out the window and felt ice flood her veins. The man dismounting in the yard was tall and broad, well dressed in a way that screamed money. His hair was silver, his face lined but strong. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Charlie appeared at her shoulder. "Stay inside." "Who is that?" "That's Silas Crow, and if he's here, nothing good's about to happen." But Celeste didn't stay inside. She grabbed the rifle and followed Charlie out onto the porch, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Crow looked up as they emerged. His eyes, pale blue, cold as winter, swept over Celeste with casual assessment. Then he smiled, and it was worse than any scowl could have been. "You must be the new Mrs. Mercer," he said. His voice was cultured, smooth, completely at odds with the violence in his gaze. "How delightful! I've been hearing so much about you." Celeste lifted her chin. "Mr. Crow?" "Please call me Silas. After all, we're neighbors." He gestured to the land around them like he already owned it. "I came to speak with your husband, but I'm told he's not here. How unfortunate." "He'll be back," Charlie said, voice hard. "I'm sure he will. He seems very dedicated to this little endeavor." Crow's smile widened. "Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, are you enjoying ranch life? It must be quite a change from Philadelphia." The fact that he knew where she was from sent fear crawling up Celeste's spine. "I'm adjusting." "I'm sure you are. You seem like a resilient woman. Resilient enough to marry a stranger for survival, anyway." He said it lightly, conversationally, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. He knew. He knew everything. Celeste's fingers tightened on the rifle. "State your business, Mr. Crow, or leave." Crow laughed, delighted. "Oh, I like her, Charlie. She's got spine. More than Rhett deserves, frankly." He sobered, though the cruel amusement never left his eyes. "My business is simple. I'm here to make your husband a final offer. He sells me the North Pasture claim for a fair price, very fair, considering its current contested status, and all this unpleasantness ends. The fence cutting, the contaminated water, all of it. We part as friends. And if he refuses? Then things will get considerably more unpleasant for everyone." Crow's gaze drifted to the barn, the animals, the house. "Accidents happen on ranches, Mrs. Mercer. Fires, stampedes, equipment failures. It would be tragic if something happened to this lovely home, or to the people in it." The threat was explicit now, not even veiled. Charlie took a step forward. "You need to leave." "Of course. I wouldn't dream of overstaying my welcome." Crow tipped his hat to Celeste. "Give Rhett my regards, and tell him he has 1 week to accept my offer. After that, I stop being generous." He mounted his horse and rode out, back straight, completely unconcerned, like he just paid a social call instead of delivering a death threat. Celeste's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the rifle clattering beside her. "We need to tell Rhett," she said. "Yeah." Charlie's voice was grim. "We do." But telling Rhett meant riding to the North Pasture, and Charlie refused to let Celeste go alone. So they went together, leaving Marcus and Jimmy to watch the main house. The ride felt endless, every shadow a potential threat, every sound amplified by fear. They found Rhett at the cabin, stripped to his waist in the heat, repairing a section of the roof. He looked up at their approach and immediately knew something was wrong. He was off the roof and reaching for his shirt before they'd even dismounted. "What happened?" he demanded. Charlie told him. Every word of Crow's visit, every threat, every implication. Celeste watched Rhett's face as he listened, watched the fury build behind his eyes like a gathering storm. When Charlie finished, Rhett was silent for a long moment. Then he turned and put his fist through the cabin wall. The logs shuddered. Blood welled up on his knuckles. He didn't seem to notice. "Rhett," Celeste started. "He came to my house." Rhett's voice was low, dangerous. "He threatened my wife on my land." "He's trying to provoke you," Charlie said carefully. "Make you do something stupid. Give him an excuse to involve the law." "I don't care." "Well, you should. Because if you go after him now, you'll lose everything. The claim, the ranch, maybe your life. Rhett turned on him, eyes blazing. So what am I supposed to do? Let him terrorize us? Wait for him to burn us out? No, you're supposed to be smarter than him. Charlie held his ground. He's rich and connected. You're not. If this turns into a war, you lose. So you have to fight different. Make it legal. Make it public. Make it so he can't touch you without exposing himself. How? It was Celeste who answered. The idea had been forming in her mind the whole ride over, crystallizing into something clear and dangerous. We catch him in the act, she said. Both men turned to stare at her. What? Rhett said. He's going to escalate. You know he is. 1 week, then he'll come after the cabin or the livestock or something worse. So we let him. We set a trap and we catch him doing it. Get proof. Take it to the sheriff. That's insane, Rhett said flatly. It's strategic. It's suicide. If Crow's men come here with torches, we'll be outnumbered and outgunned. Not if we're ready. Not if we know when and where. Celeste stepped closer, willing him to listen. Think about it. He gave you a week. That means he's planning something, probably for the end of that week. Something dramatic to force your hand. We can use that. We can be ready. Charlie was nodding slowly. She's got a point, boss. We know the timeline now. We know his target. We just need to figure out the specifics and prepare. Rhett looked between them, jaw clenched. You're both out of your minds. Maybe, Celeste said, but what's your alternative? Keep playing defense until he gets lucky? Or do something that actually ends this? Rhett stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled hard and ran his bloody hand through his hair. I don't like it. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me. Celeste, if something goes wrong, then we'll deal with it. Together. She reached out and took his damaged hand, ignoring the blood. You said we'd figure this out together, so let's figure it out. Rhett looked down at their joined hands, at the wedding ring still slightly too large on her finger, at the evidence of their unlikely partnership. All right, he said finally. We'll try it your way. But if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Deal. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, and something was better than waiting to die. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Rhett moved everyone to the north pasture, Charlie, Marcus, Jimmy, Celeste, turning the cabin into a fortress. They stockpiled weapons, ammunition, supplies. Rhett sent Jimmy into town with instructions to find the sheriff, a man named Wade Turner, who supposedly couldn't be bought. Jimmy was to tell Turner about the threats, the vandalism, everything, plant the seed that something was coming. Will he help? Celeste asked. Maybe, if we can give him a reason. Rhett was checking rifles, his movements methodical. Turner's honest, but he's also smart. He won't go after Crow without solid proof, so we have to get it for him. Marcus set up a watch rotation. 2 people awake at all times, eyes on the approaches to the cabin. They had clear sight lines in 3 directions and the creek at their backs. It was defensible, if barely. Celeste learned the signals. 1 whistle for riders approaching, 2 for immediate danger, 3 for fire. She memorized where everything was kept, how to reload in the dark, what to do if shooting started. It felt surreal, like preparing for a war she'd never trained for. On the 3rd night, Jimmy returned from town with troubling news. Sheriff Turner's willing to listen, but he says he can't act on hearsay. He needs evidence, something concrete. So we get him evidence, Rhett said. How? Crow's men aren't going to announce themselves. No, but they'll leave traces. Tracks, tools, witnesses. We just have to catch them doing it. The waiting was torture. Every night Celeste lay awake in the cabin. Rhett had insisted she take the 1 bed while the men slept in shifts outside. Listening to the wind and wondering if tonight would be the night. Wondering if Crow's men were out there right now, circling, planning, waiting for their moment. During the day, she tried to stay busy. She cooked over the fireplace, washed clothes in the creek, helped Marcus repair a section of fence that had been weakened by weather. Anything to keep her hands moving and her mind occupied. But her thoughts kept drifting to Rhett, to the way he'd looked at her when she suggested the trap, surprised, maybe even impressed. To the feel of his hand in hers, bloody and rough. To the strange intimacy of living in such close quarters, sharing space and fear and something she couldn't quite name. One afternoon, she found him by the creek, sitting on a flat rock with his boots off, his feet in the water. She almost turned back, sensing he wanted solitude. But then he looked up and saw her. "You all right?" he asked. Celeste sat down beside him. "I'm scared." "Good. That means you're smart. Are you scared?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, not for me. For you. I can take care of myself." "I know you can. Doesn't mean I don't worry." He picked up a stone and threw it into the water. "This isn't what you signed up for." "Neither is it what you signed up for. You wanted a wife for paperwork. Instead, you got someone who talks you into setting traps for dangerous men." That got a rough laugh out of him. "You're full of surprises." "So are you." They sat in silence, watching the water move. Celeste became acutely aware of how close he was, their shoulders almost touching, of how his presence had gone from threatening to comforting somewhere along the way. "Rhett," she said quietly, "if this goes bad, it won't. But if it does, I need you to know." She stopped, not sure how to finish. What did she need him to know? That she didn't regret marrying him? That this month had meant something? That she was terrified of losing what they'd barely started to build? Rhett turned to look at her, really look, with those gray eyes that saw too much. "I know," he said softly. "I know." And somehow, impossibly, she believed he did. The attack came on the 6th night, exactly when Celeste had predicted. She was on watch with Charlie, sitting on the cabin porch in the dark, when she heard it. Not the whistle signal, but something else. The distant sound of horses moving fast, trying to be quiet and failing. Multiple riders. "Charlie," she whispered. He was already standing, rifle in hand. He gave one short whistle. Danger. Inside the cabin, Rhett and Marcus came awake instantly. Jimmy emerged from where he'd been sleeping near the creek. They moved with practiced efficiency, taking positions, checking weapons. "How many?" Rhett asked, voice low. "Can't tell. At least 4, maybe more." Charlie's eyes strained against the darkness. "Coming from the east." "They'll try to burn us out," Rhett said. "It's what I'd do. Quick, dramatic, hard to prove who did it." "Then we stop them before they get close enough," Marcus said. "No." Rhett's voice was hard. "We let them get close. We let them start. Then we catch them with the evidence and ride for Turner." "That's cutting it close, boss." "I know, but it's the only way this works." Celeste's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was really happening. Men were coming to kill them, and they were going to let them get close enough to try. The riders appeared as darker shadows against the night. 5 of them, moving in a loose formation toward the cabin. They stopped about 50 yards out, conferring in low voices. Then 3 dismounted and started forward on foot. Celeste could see them now in the moonlight. They carried torches, unlit, and what looked like containers. Kerosene, probably. The plan was clear. Douse the cabin, light it up, right away while it burned. Beside her, Rhett tensed. She could feel the violence coiling in him, barely restrained. He wanted to charge out there, to fight, to protect what was his, but he held himself back. The men got closer. 20 yards. 10. Close enough that Celeste could see their faces, could hear their quiet laughter as they prepared to destroy everything. That's when Rhett stood up and lit the lantern he'd been hiding. The sudden light was blinding. The 3 men froze, caught like deer. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rhett's voice cut through the night, hard and cold. "That's far enough." The men reached for their guns. But Rhett, Charlie, Marcus, and Jimmy already had theirs trained. 4 rifles against 3 surprised men. "Drop the torches," Rhett ordered, "and the kerosene, slow." "You can't prove nothing," one of them said, but his voice shook. "Don't need to prove it to you. Just need to prove it to the sheriff." Rhett gestured with his rifle. "Now drop them, or I drop you." They dropped them. The 2 men still on horseback made a decision then. They spurred their mounts and rode hard, abandoning their companions. Celeste watched them disappear into the darkness and felt a cold certainty settle over her. This wasn't over, not even close. But they had what they needed. 3 men caught red-handed with arson materials. Torches, kerosene, intent. It was enough. Marcus and Charlie kept the three men covered while Rhett turned to Jimmy. Ride to town. Get Turner. Tell him we've got Crow's men and we've got proof. Tell him if he wants to save his reputation, he better get here before dawn. Jimmy ran for his horse. Rhett turned to Celeste. You did good. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat was too tight, so she just nodded. They waited in tense silence, the three captured men sitting with their hands behind their heads, glaring hatred. Celeste kept her rifle trained on them even though her arms ached and her hands shook. She didn't trust herself to speak, didn't trust her voice not to break. One of the men finally spat into the dirt. You're dead. You know that, right? Mr. Crow ain't gonna let this stand. Mr. Crow's gonna have bigger problems, Rhett said calmly, like explaining to a jury why his men were trying to burn down a legal homestead. You got no proof we work for him. Don't need it. You're on my land with criminal intent. That's enough. The man sneered. You think Turner's gonna side with you over Silas Crow? You're stupider than I thought. Charlie hit him. Not hard, but enough to shut him up. Save it for the sheriff. Dawn was breaking when Jimmy returned with Sheriff Wade Turner and two deputies. Turner was a big man, heavy through the middle, with eyes that had seen too much and a mouth set in a permanent frown. He took in the scene, the captured men, the torches, the kerosene, and his frown deepened. This better be good, Mercer, he said. Rhett gestured to the evidence. Caught them in the act. They were going to burn the cabin. All of us in it, probably. Turner walked over to the kerosene containers, bent down, sniffed. And you're saying Silas Crow sent them? I'm saying they work for Crow, and they were on my land trying to commit arson. Put it together yourself. One of the captured men opened his mouth to protest, but Turner silenced him with a look. You boys got anything to say for yourselves? We were just riding through with torches and kerosene at 4 a.m. on private property. Turner's voice dripped skepticism. Try again. The men fell silent. Turner turned back to Rhett. I'll take them in. Question them properly. But Mercer, this don't prove Crow ordered it. Just proves these idiots were stupid enough to get caught. It proves there's a pattern, Celeste spoke up. Everyone turned to look at her. She swallowed hard and continued. The cut fence, the poisoned water, now this. All targeting this claim. That's not coincidence. That's coordinated. Turner studied her. And you are? Celeste Mercer, Rhett's wife. Turner didn't look impressed. Well, Mrs. Mercer, what you call a pattern, a lawyer calls circumstantial evidence, won't hold up without someone willing to testify that Crow gave the order. Then make them testify, Rhett said. Can't make a man incriminate his employer. They got rights. What about our rights? Celeste heard herself getting angry. We have a right to live here without being terrorized, to build our home without it being destroyed. Doesn't that matter? Turner's expression softened slightly. It matters. But the law's the law. I do this wrong. Crow walks, and you get nothing. So what do we do? Rhett asked. You let me do my job. I'll question these three, see if any of them crack. Maybe one of them's got a conscience or a grudge. Maybe I get lucky. Turner gestured to his deputies. Load them up. We're heading back. The deputies hauled the three men to their feet and started marching them toward the horses. Turner lingered, looking at Rhett with something like respect. You handled this smart, he said. Could have gone bad. Could have been bodies instead of arrests. That would have made my life hell. I've got a smart wife, Rhett said, glancing at Celeste. Turner followed his gaze. Seems so. Take care of her, Mercer, and watch your back. This ain't over. I know. They watched Turner and his men ride away with their prisoners, the sun climbing higher, turning the sky from gray to gold. When they were gone, the silence felt profound. Charlie let out a long breath. Well, that happened. That happened, Rhett agreed. He turned to look at the cabin, at the torches and kerosene still scattered on the ground, evidence of how close they'd come to losing everything. We need to clean this up, secure the perimeter, stay on watch. You think Crow's going to try again? Marcus asked. I think he's going to be furious, which makes him more dangerous, not less. They worked through the morning, collecting evidence, fortifying their position, trying to prepare for whatever came next. But Celeste could feel the fear settling into her bones. They'd won a battle, maybe, but the war wasn't over. The attack Celeste had been dreading came 3 days later, and it came at dusk when the light was failing and visibility was at its worst. They'd been living on borrowed time since Turner had taken Crow's men away. Everyone knew it. The tension at the cabin had become unbearable, strung so tight that the smallest sound made them reach for weapons. They took turns sleeping, always with one eye open, always listening. Rhett had barely slept at all. Celeste watched him wearing himself down, pacing the perimeter at all hours, checking and rechecking their defenses. She'd tried to talk to him about it, but he'd shut her down. "I'm fine," he'd said, which was obviously a lie. "You're exhausted. You need to rest." "I'll rest when this is over." That was the afternoon before everything went to hell. Celeste was inside the cabin preparing what passed for dinner, beans and salt pork, the same thing they'd been eating for days, when she heard Charlie's voice from outside, not alarmed exactly, but sharp with attention. "Riders coming, multiple." Her hand stilled on the pot. She set it aside carefully and reached for the rifle that was never more than arm's length away now. When she stepped outside, the others were already there, watching the horizon. 6 riders. Coming fast, not trying to hide anymore. "That's not Crow's men," Marcus said, squinting against the dying light. "Those are lawmen. I can see the badges." Relief flooded through Celeste so intensely she felt dizzy. Turner had come. He'd actually come. Maybe one of those men had talked. Maybe there was news. Maybe this nightmare was finally ending. But Rhett didn't lower his rifle. "Something's wrong." "What do you mean?" Celeste asked. "Turner wouldn't bring 6 men just to deliver good news. And look," he pointed. "They're armed for trouble." He was right. As the riders got closer, Celeste could see they all carried rifles, their postures tense, alert. This wasn't a social call. Turner pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin. His face was grim, his eyes hard. The 5 men with him fanned out slightly, creating a loose semicircle. Deputies, Celeste assumed, though she didn't recognize any of them. "Mercer," Turner called out. "We need to talk." Rhett stepped forward, rifle held low but ready. "I'm listening." "Not out here. Inside. Just you and me. Whatever you've got to say, you can say it in front of my people." Turner's jaw worked. "Fine. Have it your way." He dismounted, his movements heavy with reluctance. "The 3 men we arrested, they're dead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Celeste felt the ground shift under her feet. "What?" Rhett's voice was dangerous. "Found them this morning. All 3. Hung themselves in their cells, apparently." "Bullshit," Charlie spat. Turner's expression darkened. "That's what I said, but the county coroner ruled it suicide. All 3 of them. Same night, same method. Convenient as hell, ain't it?" Rhett's knuckles went white on his rifle. "Crow got to them." "Can't prove that. And before you ask, no, none of them talked before they died. They took whatever they knew to their graves." Turner's eyes were bleak. "Which means I got nothing. No witnesses, no testimony, no case. Crow walks?" "So that's it?" Celeste heard herself say. "He kills 3 men to keep them quiet, and nothing happens?" "I didn't say that." Turner's voice was hard. "I said I can't prove murder. But I can sure as hell investigate it, and I can make sure Crow knows I'm watching, which is why I'm here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, handed it to Rhett. "What is this?" Rhett asked. "Warrant. Judge issued it this afternoon. It's for Crow's arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder." Celeste's breath caught. "You're arresting him?" "Trying to. Problem is, Crow's holed up at his ranch with about 20 armed men. Says he won't come peacefully. Says this is persecution, that you and I are in cahoots to steal his land." Turner's laugh was bitter. "Man's got balls, I'll give him that." "So what do you need from us?" Rhett asked. "I need you to stay here. Stay out of it. Let me handle this legal." Turner's eyes bored into Rhett's. "I know what you're thinking. I can see it on your face. But if you go after Crow now, you'll give him exactly what he wants. A reason to claim self-defense. He'll say you attacked him, and he'll walk away clean. You're asking me to do nothing while he's out there planning his next move. I'm asking you to trust the law." Rhett's laugh was sharp, humorless. "The law just let 3 witnesses die in custody." "Yeah, and that's on me. I won't let it happen again." Turner stepped closer. "Give me 3 days. That's all I'm asking. 3 days to bring him in proper. After that, if he's still walking free, you do what you have to do." The 2 men stared at each other. Celeste could see the war happening behind Rhett's eyes. the need for action battling against the knowledge that Turner was right. Finally, Rhett gave a single sharp nod. 3 days. Thank you. Turner turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. You might want to clear out of here for a bit. Go back to the main ranch. Somewhere with more people, more eyes. Because if Crow's desperate enough to kill his own men, he's desperate enough to come for you direct. We're not running, Celeste said before Rhett could answer. Turner looked at her. Ma'am, I respect your courage. But courage don't stop bullets. Neither does running. We stay. Turner shook his head. Your funeral. He mounted up and gestured to his men. As they rode away, he called back over his shoulder. 3 days, Mercer. Don't make me regret this. When the dust settled, Charlie was the first to speak. Well, hell. Yeah, Rhett said flatly. You really think Turner can bring Crow in? No, but I think he'll try, and that might be enough to distract Crow long enough for us to… Rhett stopped, his eyes going distant. To what? Celeste asked. But Rhett was already moving, striding toward the cabin with purpose. Charlie, Marcus, Jimmy. Inside. Now. They gathered around the rough table in the cabin's main room. Rhett spread out a hand-drawn map of the area, weighted down at the corners with stones. His finger stabbed at a point north of their position. Turner's going to approach from the main road here. That's the obvious route, the legal route. Crow will see him coming and be ready. Rhett's finger moved. But there's a back way onto Crow's property, through the canyon. Hard riding, easy to miss if you don't know it's there. My father used to run cattle through there years ago. What are you thinking? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I'm thinking while Turner keeps Crow busy at the front door, we go in the back, find evidence. Something concrete that ties him to the fence cutting, the poisoning, the arson attempt. Something Turner can use. That's breaking and entering, Charlie pointed out. That's survival. Celeste leaned over the map. How many men does Crow have? 20, Turner said, but most of them will be watching the main approach. Maybe 5 at the house itself, probably less. Rhett looked up at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking if we're going to do this, we need to be smart, in and out fast. No confrontation if we can avoid it. Her mind was racing. We need a distraction, something to draw those 5 men away from the house. Like what? Celeste met his eyes. Like me. The room erupted. Rhett's absolutely not collided with Charlie's have you lost your mind and Marcus's sharp intake of breath. But Celeste pressed on. Listen to me. Crow knows who I am. He came to the ranch to see me, remember? If I show up at his gate asking to talk, claiming I want to negotiate, he'll kill you, Rhett interrupted. No, he won't. Not right away. He'll want to hear what I have to say. He'll want to use me against you. She could see the logic of it crystallizing as she spoke. I buy you time. 15 minutes, maybe 20. You get in, find what you need, get out. By the time he realizes it's a setup, you're gone. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous. At least this gives us a chance. Rhett stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. No, find another way. There is no other way. You know it. Celeste stood too, facing him across the table. You said we'd figure this out together, so let's figure it out. But don't shut me out because you're scared. I'm not scared, I'm being rational. You're being a hypocrite. You can risk your life, but I can't risk mine? That's different. Why? Because I'm a woman? Because I'm your wife? The words came out heated, angry. I'm part of this. I have been since the day I said yes in that courthouse. You don't get to protect me now by cutting me out. Rhett's eyes blazed. If something happens to you, then it happens. Same as if something happens to you or Charlie or anyone else. Celeste's voice shook, but she held his gaze. We're in this together, Rhett. All of us. Stop trying to do it alone. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of breathing. Finally, Charlie cleared his throat. She's got a point, boss, about the distraction. We need something, and she's the only one Crow would actually talk to instead of shooting on sight. I don't like it, Rhett said. You don't have to like it. You just have to accept it's the best option we've got. Rhett looked at each of them in turn, his jaw working. Then his shoulders sagged, just slightly. If we do this, and that's if, there have to be rules, safety measures. You don't go alone. Marcus goes with you. Stays close. First sign of trouble, you get out. And we set a time limit. 20 minutes maximum. After that, we all pull back regardless of what we've found. Agreed, Celeste said quickly before he could change his mind. And you carry a gun, a pistol, something you can hide. Promise me you'll use it if you have to. The weight of that settled over her. Carrying a gun was one thing. Using it, actually pulling the trigger on another human being, was something else entirely. But she nodded. I promise. They spent the rest of the night planning, going over the map, timing the approach, working out signals and contingencies. Jimmy would stay with the horses, ready to ride if things went sideways. Charlie and Rhett would go into the house together while Marcus waited with Celeste. If shooting started, everyone ran for the canyon and didn't stop until they hit the creek. It was barely a plan, more like organized desperation. But it was all they had. Dawn came too fast. Celeste stood outside the cabin watching the sun break over the horizon and tried to steady her breathing. She'd changed into her darkest dress, pinned her hair tight, and strapped the pistol Rhett had given her to her thigh under her skirt. The weight of it was foreign and terrible. Rhett found her there. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her looking at the same sunrise. You can still back out, he said finally. So can you. I asked you first. Celeste turned to look at him. Really look, maybe for the last time. His face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, his eyes shadowed. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like tenderness. I'm not backing out, she said softly. Celeste. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. If this goes bad, if we don't make it back, I need you to know. She put her hand over his mouth, stopping him. Don't say goodbye. Say see you soon. Rhett pulled her hand away but didn't let go. His grip was tight, almost desperate. See you soon. See you soon. He kissed her then, fast and hard and clumsy, nothing like the romantic gestures in novels. It was rushed and scared and absolutely perfect. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. Don't you dare die on me, he said. Same to you. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, splitting into two groups at the canyon entrance. Rhett, Charlie, and Jimmy went left, toward the back approach to Crow's ranch. Celeste and Marcus went right, toward the main gate. The ride took an hour, long enough for Celeste's courage to waver and solidify and waver again. Marcus rode beside her in silence, his face unreadable. You ever kill anyone? She asked him. Marcus looked at her. Why you asking? Because I might have to, today. And I don't know if I can. You can if you have to. Body knows what to do when it's survival. He paused. But yeah, I have. During the war. And after, once, when a man tried to rob the ranch. It don't get easier, but it gets possible, if that makes sense. It did, in a terrible way. Crow's ranch appeared on the horizon like a fortress. Big house, multiple outbuildings, fenced corrals. Men moved around the property, armed and watchful. This was not a place where visitors were welcome. They stopped at the gate. A man with a rifle slung over his shoulder approached, his hand resting on the weapon. State your business. Celeste lifted her chin. I'm here to see Mr. Crow. Tell him Celeste Mercer wants to talk. The man's eyes narrowed. Boss ain't receiving visitors. He'll receive me. Tell him I have a proposal about the North Pasture claim. The man hesitated, then gestured to someone behind the fence. Wait here. 5 agonizing minutes passed. Then the gate swung open and a different man appeared, older, better dressed, with the air of someone in authority. Mrs. Mercer, this is unexpected. Mr. Crow will see you. Your friend stays outside. He stays with me or I don't come in. A tense pause. Then the man shrugged. Fine. But any trouble and you both leave in pieces. Understood? They were escorted across the compound toward the main house. Celeste counted men as they walked. 7 visible, probably more inside. Too many. Way too many. The house was ostentatious, all imported furniture and expensive rugs. Everything designed to impress, to intimidate. They were led to a study where Silas Crow sat behind a massive desk, looking like he'd been expecting them. Mrs. Mercer, he said pleasantly. What a delightful surprise. Do sit down. Celeste sat. Marcus stood behind her, tense as a coiled spring. I'll get right to it, Celeste said. I want to make a deal. Crow's eyebrows rose. Oh? My husband is stubborn, too stubborn. He won't sell you the claim because it's become about pride. But I'm more practical. She made herself meet his cold eyes. I didn't come out here to die for a piece of land. I came here to survive. How refreshingly honest. Go on. You want the claim. We want to live. There has to be a compromise, a price that makes everyone happy. Crow leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. And does your husband know you're here? No. He'd be furious if he did. But like I said, he's too proud to see reason. Someone has to be smart. And what makes you think I'm interested in compromise? I could simply wait for Sheriff Turner to fail, which he will, and then take what I want. You could, but that's messy, public. Might attract attention you don't want. Federal investigators, maybe. Questions about those 3 men who died in custody. Celeste kept her voice steady, even though her heart was trying to break through her ribs. Whereas if we settle this privately, everyone walks away clean. Crow studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You're quite clever, aren't you? More clever than that brute you married deserves. He stood, walking around the desk to perch on the edge. I appreciate cleverness. It's in short supply these days. So you'll consider it? I'll consider it, though I confess I'm curious about the timing. Why come to me now? What changed? This was the dangerous part. The lie had to be perfect. The attack on the cabin, Celeste said. The men with torches. I realized how close we came to dying, and I thought, is this worth it? Is any piece of land worth burning alive for? She let her voice shake. Not hard to do. I want to live, Mr. Crow, and I don't think my husband can protect me from you. He can't, Crow agreed. Nobody can. Then help me convince him. Give me a number I can take back, something generous enough that he can't refuse without looking like a fool. Crow seemed to consider this. Outside, somewhere in the compound, someone shouted, "Boots on wood!" Rapid movement. Celeste's stomach dropped. They'd been discovered. Crow's expression changed, going from thoughtful to predatory in an instant. You're stalling, he said softly. I don't know what you... Yes, you do. He moved fast, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. Marcus lunged forward, but 2 men appeared in the doorway, rifles raised. Your husband's here, isn't he? Somewhere on my property, doing something he shouldn't be. Let her go, Marcus growled. Or what? You'll shoot me in my own house? Crow's grip on Celeste's arm was bruising. How many men do you think you'll get through before they cut you down? More shouting outside. Gunshots, 3 of them, sharp and close. Celeste's breath stopped. Crow dragged her to the window. From there she could see the chaos erupting in the compound. Men running, weapons drawn. And there, near the stables, she saw them, Rhett and Charlie, sprinting for the horses with papers clutched in Rhett's hand. They'd found something. They'd actually found something, but between them and escape were at least a dozen armed men. No, Celeste breathed. Oh yes, Crow's voice was triumphant. Your husband just signed his own death warrant, and yours. Celeste didn't think. She just moved. Her hand went to her thigh, found the pistol, pulled it free. She pressed the barrel against Crow's ribs. Tell them to stand down, she said. Now! The room went absolutely still. Marcus had his gun out too, covering the men in the doorway. The men had their rifles aimed at him. Everyone was one twitch away from death. Crow laughed. You won't shoot me. Try me. You're not a killer, Mrs. Mercer. I can see it in your eyes. You're scared. Scared people do desperate things. She cocked the hammer. The sound was deafening in the silence. Tell them to let my husband go, or I swear I'll put a hole through your lung. Outside, more gunshots. Someone screamed. Celeste couldn't see what was happening anymore, but she could hear it. The chaos, the violence, the sound of everything falling apart. Crow's jaw clenched. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his face. All right, he said tightly. All right. You want to make a deal? Here's my deal. Lower the gun and I'll call them off. You and your husband get to ride away. Today. This once. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I come for you with everything I have. But today, you get to live. That's my final offer. Celeste's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pistol steady. She looked at Marcus, saw the calculation in his eyes. They were outnumbered 20-3, maybe more. If they tried to shoot their way out, they'd die. All of them. But if they took the deal, they'd live. For today, at least. Celeste! Rhett's voice somewhere outside, desperate. Celeste! She made the decision. Call them off, she said to Crow. Do it now or I shoot. Crow moved to the window and shouted, Stand down! Let them go! The shooting stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, Celeste could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder. Slowly, carefully, she lowered the gun. Crow stepped away from her, his face twisted with rage. Get out, he said, before I change my mind. Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. They ran through the house, out into the compound where Rhett was already on his horse, eyes wild. Celeste! She ran to him. He pulled her up behind him without a word, and they were moving, all of them, racing for the gate. Someone fired a shot that went wide, another that hit the dirt near the horse's hooves, but they made it through, made it to the canyon, made it to safety. They didn't stop riding until they reached the creek. Only then did Rhett pull up, breathing hard, and turn to look at her. What did you do? He demanded. What I had to. You held a gun on Silas Crow. Yes, you could have been killed. So could you. Celeste slid off the horse, her legs shaking. Did you get it? The evidence? Rhett held up the papers, crumpled now but intact. Ledgers. His men kept records of everything. Who they paid, what they destroyed, when they did it. It's all here. Despite everything, Celeste felt a fierce surge of triumph. Then it was worth it. Rhett dismounted and grabbed her shoulders. Don't ever do that again. Which part? Any of it. All of it. I thought I lost you. You didn't. I could have. His voice cracked. Celeste, when I heard those shots and didn't know if you were... She kissed him. Longer this time, less desperate and more certain. When she pulled back, his eyes were still afraid, but also something else. Something warm. I'm here, she said. We're both here. And we've got what we need. Charlie rode up beside them. We need to move. Crow's not going to honor that deal for long. The cabin? Rhett asked. No. Town. Straight to Turner. We hand this over and let the law handle the rest. They rode hard for town, the sun climbing toward noon. The heat was brutal, but none of them noticed. They were too focused on survival, on getting to safety, on making this mean something. Sheriff Turner was at his office when they arrived, looking surprised and then alarmed as they burst through the door. What the hell happened? He demanded. Rhett slammed the ledgers on Turner's desk. Evidence? Everything you need to hang Crow for what he's done. Turner grabbed the papers, scanning quickly. His eyes went wide. Where did you get this? Don't ask questions you don't want answered, Charlie said. Turner looked at them, dusty, exhausted. Celeste still holding her pistol in a white-knuckled grip. He shook his head slowly. You went to Crow's ranch. You broke in and stole these. We recovered evidence of crimes, Rhett corrected. What you do with it is your business. Turner sat down heavily. This is a prosecutor's dream. Names, dates, amounts paid. If this holds up... He looked at Rhett. You know what you just did? You just made me a hero or got me killed. Maybe both. So arrest Crow. Before he has time to disappear, this evidence like he disappeared those witnesses. I will. But you need to lay low. All of you. Crow's going to come for you when he figures out what you did. Let him come, Rhett said. But Celeste saw the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that they'd pushed Crow past the point of restraint. Whatever happened next would be brutal. Turner stood. Give me 6 hours. I'll get a warrant, round up deputies, go in with force. But you, he pointed at Rhett, you stay out of it. I mean it. Don't give him an excuse to claim self-defense. They left the sheriff's office and stood in the street, suddenly aimless. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had just intensified. But for a moment, standing in the afternoon sun, Celeste let herself feel the weight lift just slightly. They'd done it. They'd gotten the evidence. The rest was up to Turner now. Rhett took her hand, lacing their fingers together. We should go back to the ranch, the main ranch, not the cabin. Somewhere with walls and witnesses. All right. They started walking toward the horses. Behind them, she could hear Turner already calling for his deputies, his voice sharp with urgency. The machinery of law was finally turning in their favor, but Celeste couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The worst came that night, just as Celeste had feared. They'd made it back to the main ranch by late afternoon, exhausted and wired with adrenaline that refused to fade. Charlie had insisted everyone eat, though none of them had much appetite. They sat around the kitchen table picking at food, jumping at every sound, waiting for something they couldn't name. Marcus was on the porch keeping watch. Jimmy checked the horses every 20 minutes. Rhett cleaned weapons with methodical precision, his hands steady even though his eyes were distant. Celeste tried to help Charlie with the dishes and ended up breaking a plate because her hands were shaking so badly. "It's all right," Charlie said gently, taking the pieces from her. "Go sit down." "I can't sit. I need to do something." "Then go talk to your husband. He's wound tighter than a watch spring." Celeste found Rhett in the main room, still working on the rifles. She sat down beside him without speaking. After a moment, he set down the gun he was cleaning and looked at her. "You holding up?" he asked. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." "Tomorrow you'll be safe. Turner will have Crow in custody, and this'll all be over." He said it like he believed it. Celeste wished she could. What if Turner can't get to him in time? What if Crow comes here first? Then we fight. Rhett's voice was matter-of-fact. "We've got the high ground, good sight lines, enough ammunition to hold off an army, and everyone here knows how to shoot." "Even me?" "Especially you. You held a gun on Silas Crow and lived to tell about it. That takes more than luck." Celeste looked at her hands. They still smelled like gun oil from handling the pistol. "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." Before Celeste could respond, Marcus burst through the door. His face was grim. "Riders. Coming fast from the north. At least a dozen, maybe more." Everything stopped. Then everyone moved at once. Rhett grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. Charlie extinguished the lamps, plunging the house into darkness. Jimmy ran for the barn to secure the horses. Celeste stood frozen for a heartbeat before her body caught up with her mind. She grabbed her pistol and followed Rhett outside. The night was moonless, thick with dark, but she could hear them now, the thunder of hooves getting closer. Too many. Way too many. "Positions," Rhett ordered. "Charlie, upstairs window facing north. Marcus, barn. Jimmy, you're with him. Celeste, I'm staying with you. Celeste, we don't have time to argue." He looked at her for one long moment, then nodded sharply. "Behind the water trough. It'll give you cover." They scattered to their positions. Celeste crouched behind the trough, her pistol held in both hands to stop the shaking. The wood was rough against her back, and she could smell the water, clean and cold. Strange the things you noticed when you thought you might die. The riders appeared as shadows against the slightly lighter sky. They pulled up about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose line. Someone held a torch, the flame dancing in the darkness. "Mercer!" a voice rang out. Not Crow. Younger. Harder. "We know you're in there. Send out the ledgers and the woman, and maybe we let the rest of you live." Rhett stood up from behind the porch railing. "The ledgers are with the sheriff. You're too late." Harsh laughter. "Turner? He's been dealt with. Someone burned down his office about an hour ago. Terrible accident. Lost all that evidence in the fire." Celeste felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Turner. All that work. All that risk. Gone. "You're lying," Rhett called back, but his voice was tight. "Believe what you want. Don't change the situation. You stole from Mr. Crow. That's a hanging offense in these parts. Self-defense ain't stealing, and if you think we're coming out peaceful, you're stupider than you look. Then you're all gonna die in there. Your choice." The man with the torch threw it. It arced through the air and landed on the roof of the barn. Jimmy and Marcus were inside. The dry wood caught instantly, flames licking up into the night. "No!" Celeste heard herself scream. Chaos erupted. The riders charged. Gunfire exploded from multiple directions. From the house, from the barn, from the attackers. Bullets thudded into wood, shattered glass, kicked up dirt. The noise was deafening. overwhelming. Celeste fired blindly at the shapes moving in the darkness. The pistol kicked in her hand. She had no idea if she hit anything. She just kept pulling the trigger until the gun clicked empty. Someone screamed. A horse went down. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky, turning night into terrible day. Through the fire, she saw Marcus and Jimmy running, shooting as they came. They made it to the house and dove through the door just as a bullet took a chunk out of the door frame. "How many?" Rhett shouted. "Too many!" Marcus was reloading with shaking hands. "They got us surrounded!" More gunfire. A window exploded inward. Charlie returned fire from upstairs, his rifle cracking steadily. But for every attacker they drove back, 2 more seemed to appear. Celeste reloaded her pistol with fumbling fingers. The barn was completely gone now, a tower of flame that would be visible for miles. Everything they'd built, burning, just like Crow wanted. Then she heard it. Through the gunfire and the roar of flames and the shouting, horses. More of them, coming from the south. "We got more coming," Jimmy yelled. But these riders weren't shooting. They were yelling something else. Orders, commands. And the attacking riders were turning, confused, trying to figure out what was happening. A voice cut through the chaos, amplified somehow. "This is Sheriff Wade Turner. Drop your weapons. You're all under arrest." Hope flared in Celeste's chest, so sharp it hurt. The shooting stopped. For a moment, everything hung in balance. Then the attackers broke, scattering in 3 directions. Turner's men gave chase, more gunfire echoing in the distance. But not all of them ran. 3 riders stayed, circling toward the house with clear intent. And Celeste recognized the one in front, even in the firelight. Silas Crow. He dismounted smoothly, a rifle in his hands, and started walking toward the house like he owned it. Like he owned everything. His 2 men flanked him, weapons ready. "Enough games, Mercer," Crow called out. "You and me, let's finish this." Rhett stepped out onto the porch. "You should have stayed away. You destroyed my ledgers, tried to destroy my reputation. Did you really think I'd let that stand?" Crow's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "Everything I built, everything I am, and you thought you could take it with some stolen papers and a corrupt sheriff. Turner's not corrupt, and those papers were copies. The originals are already with the territorial judge in Phoenix. You're done, Crow." Crow's pleasant expression cracked. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask yourself why Turner showed up with so many men. He wasn't just chasing your thugs. He was serving a warrant for your arrest." "Then I'll kill him too." Crow raised his rifle. Celeste moved without thinking. She stepped out from behind the trough, her pistol aimed at Crow's chest. "No!" Crow's eyes flicked to her. "The brave little wife. How touching. I held a gun on you once. I'll do it again. And I'll kill you for it." Crow's rifle swung toward her. The next few seconds happened in fragments, disconnected and terrible. Rhett shouting her name, the crack of a rifle, Celeste pulling her trigger, the impact that spun Crow sideways, another shot from somewhere else, Charlie maybe, or Marcus, that took down one of Crow's men. The second man fired wild and ran. More riders appeared. Turner's deputies rounding up the fleeing attackers. Someone was yelling for medical help. Celeste stood frozen, her pistol still raised, staring at Silas Crow lying in the dirt. She'd shot him. She'd actually shot him. The gun fell from her numb fingers. Rhett was there, his hands on her shoulders. "Celeste, look at me." She couldn't. She could only stare at Crow, watching Turner's men surround him, watching the blood spread dark against his expensive shirt. "Is he dead?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. "I don't know. Does it matter?" Did it? She'd killed a man, or tried to, or maybe just wounded him. She didn't know which was worse. Turner appeared, his face blackened with smoke. "Everyone all right?" "Define all right," Charlie said from the doorway. Turner surveyed the burning barn, the bullet-riddled house, the bodies scattered across the yard. He shook his head. "Hell of a mess." "Did you get them?" Rhett asked. "Most of them. The ones we didn't get won't make it far." Turner looked at Crow, who was being tended to by one of his deputies. "He'll live, unfortunately, but he'll stand trial. Between the ledgers and the witnesses we caught tonight, he's finished." "The ledgers survived the fire?" Celeste found her voice. Turner allowed himself a grim smile. "What fire?" "I made that up to draw Crow out. Figured if he thought the evidence was destroyed, he'd come for you direct. And he did. He spat into the dirt. Amateur move. Man that rich should know better. Rhett let out a breath that might have been a laugh. You used us as bait. I asked you to trust the law. You did. Worked out, didn't it? Celeste wanted to argue, to point out all the ways it hadn't worked out, all the ways they could have died. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her legs gave out and Rhett caught her, holding her up. She needs rest, he said. We all do. Turner nodded. Get her inside. I'll handle the cleanup. And Mercer? You and your wife are going to need to testify, probably multiple times. You comfortable with that? Long as it puts Crow away for good. It will. I'll make sure of it. The next hours blurred together. Turner's men worked through the night, hauling away bodies, putting out what remained of the fire, taking statements. Celeste sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, watching it all like a theater performance she wasn't part of. Rhett sat beside her. Not touching, just present. Solid. You saved my life, he said eventually. You would have done the same. I know, but I shouldn't have had to. I should have... He stopped, frustrated. I keep trying to protect you, and you keep throwing yourself into danger. Maybe I don't need protecting. Maybe I just need a partner. Rhett looked at her. Really looked, the way he had that first day when he'd offered her an impossible bargain. Is that what you want? To be partners? I think we already are. Have been for a while. We were just too stubborn to admit it. I'm not good at this, Rhett said quietly. Being married, being with someone, letting someone in. Neither am I, but we'll figure it out. Celeste leaned against his shoulder. That's what we do, right? Figure things out together. Rhett's arm came around her, pulling her close. They sat like that as dawn broke over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The barn was gone, the house was damaged, but they were alive. They'd survived. 2 weeks later, Celeste stood in front of the territorial courthouse in Phoenix, wearing a dress she'd bought with her own money, waiting for the verdict. Rhett stood beside her, clean-shaven and uncomfortable in borrowed formal wear. Behind them, Charlie, Marcus, and Jimmy waited with the quiet patience of men who'd seen worse things than courtrooms. The trial had lasted 3 days. Celeste had testified for 2 hours, recounting everything: Crow's threats, the vandalism, the attacks. She'd looked him in the eye the whole time, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Rhett had testified too, presenting the ledgers, explaining the claim, making it clear this wasn't about money or pride, but survival. The jury had deliberated for 6 hours. Now the judge was reading the verdict, his voice carrying across the crowded room. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of arson, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty, guilty, guilty. Every charge, every crime. The evidence had been overwhelming. Crow's own records had condemned him, and the men they'd captured that night had turned on him when offered leniency, desperate to save themselves. Silas Crow would spend the rest of his life in territorial prison. His empire would be broken up and sold. The North Pasture claim would stand unchallenged, legal, and permanent. It was over. Celeste felt Rhett's hand find hers. She squeezed back, hard. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions. Rhett ignored them all, pulling Celeste through the crowd toward the wagon where Charlie was waiting. They climbed aboard and didn't look back. So what now? Charlie asked as they headed out of the city. Now we go home, Rhett said, and we build. They built. Over the next year, Iron Hollow Ranch transformed from a struggling claim into something real and permanent. They repaired the main house, rebuilt the barn bigger and better than before, fenced the North Pasture properly. Celeste took over the books and discovered she had a knack for managing money. Under her careful accounting, the ranch started turning a profit for the first time in years. The cabin on the North Pasture became a second home, a place they'd retreat to when the main ranch got too loud or busy. They'd spend weekends there, just the two of them, working the land and learning how to be married in truth instead of just on paper. It wasn't always easy. Rhett still had moments where he closed down, where the walls went up and Celeste couldn't reach him. And Celeste still had nightmares about the night of the attack, still sometimes woke up thinking she was holding a gun on Silas Crow. But they worked at it. They talked, fought, made up, tried again. Slowly, The marriage of convenience became something neither of them had expected, a partnership built on trust and tested by fire. Charlie stayed on, becoming more family than employee. Marcus and Jimmy stayed too, bringing on new hands as the ranch grew. Within 2 years, they were running 200 head of cattle and talking about expansion. The land inspector came back, official and solemn, and declared the claim proved beyond any doubt. The North Pasture was theirs, legally and permanently. Rhett had finished his father's dream. 3 years after that terrible night, Celeste stood on the porch of the main house watching the sun set over land that belonged to them, land they'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for. It stretched out every direction, beautiful and brutal, and theirs. She heard Rhett's footsteps behind her, recognized them without turning. He'd taken to walking quieter lately, more careful. The wound he'd taken during the final attack, one she hadn't even known about until days later, still bothered him in cold weather. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. It was a question he asked sometimes, usually late at night when the darkness made old fears resurface. The original terms of their agreement said she could leave after the claim was proved. It had been proved for 3 years now. "No," Celeste said, same as she always did. "I'm thinking about staying." "Why?" She turned to look at him. His face had weathered over the years, more lines around his eyes, a few strands of gray in his dark hair. But the eyes themselves were warmer now, less guarded. She'd done that maybe, or they'd done it together. "Because I built this," she said simply. "Not just the ranch. This life. This home. You and me. It's mine as much as yours. Why would I leave something I helped create?" Rhett smiled, something he did more often now. "Good answer. Besides, where else would I go? Back east? I'd die of boredom within a week." "You'd survive. You always do." "Maybe, but I wouldn't be happy." Celeste took his hand, lacing their fingers together the way she had 100 times before. "I'm happy here. With you. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Even when I'm impossible? Especially then." Rhett pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you, in case I don't say it enough." "You don't. But I love you too, so we're even." They stood together watching the light fade, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. In the distance, cattle moved across the North Pasture, the grass there, green and thick thanks to the creek that ran year-round. The cabin stood solid against the horizon, smoke rising from its chimney where Charlie had probably started a fire. "You ever regret it?" Rhett asked, "saying yes that first day?" Celeste thought about it honestly, about the fear, the danger, the moment she'd been certain she'd made the worst mistake of her life, about holding a gun with shaking hands and not knowing if she'd live to see another sunrise. But she also thought about everything else, the partnership they'd built, the land they'd claimed, the life they'd fought for together. The way Rhett looked at her now like she hung the moon, when 4 years ago he'd looked at her like a business transaction. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. Do you?" "Best decision I ever made, even if I didn't know it at the time. You proposed to a stranger before sunset. And that stranger turned out to be the stubbornest, bravest, most infuriating woman I've ever met. So yeah, best decision." Celeste laughed. "Infuriating? You held a gun on one of the most powerful men in the territory. You broke into his house and stole his ledgers. We make a good team." "Yeah," Celeste agreed. "We do." 5 years later, they had 2 children and a ranch that sprawled across 3 times the land they'd started with. 10 years after that, the ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. 20 years after Celeste had knocked on Rhett's door with nothing but desperation and a carpet bag, Iron Hollow Ranch was legendary. But none of that mattered as much as the small moments. The mornings drinking coffee on the porch, the evenings reading together by the fire, the nights lying in bed talking about everything and nothing while the desert wind sang outside their window. They'd started with a bargain made in desperation. They'd built it into something that looked a lot like love, not the easy, simple kind from storybooks. The hard, complicated, real kind that survived fire and bullets and doubt and fear. Celeste had come to Arizona with nothing, searching for survival. She'd found it. But she'd also found something else, a place where stubborn counted as strength, where fear didn't mean failure. where two broken people could build something whole together. The land had tried to kill them. Powerful men had tried to destroy them. They'd survived it all by refusing to quit, refusing to run, refusing to let anyone tell them they didn't belong. And in the end, belonging wasn't something you were given. It was something you earned, fought for, built with your own bleeding hands. Celeste had earned her place here, not as Rhett's wife or the woman from Philadelphia or the brave fool who'd held a gun on Silas Crow, but as herself. As someone who'd looked at an impossible situation and found a way through. As someone who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to claim your life, make it yours, fight for it when the world tried to take it away. That was the real victory. Not defeating Crow or saving the ranch or proving the claim, but becoming someone she could respect. Someone who didn't run from hard things. Someone who stood her ground and built something that lasted. Years later, when Celeste was old and gray and her children asked about how she'd met their father, she'd tell them the truth. About the desperate bargain, the brutal land, the dangerous men, about fear and courage and the thin line between them. But mostly she'd tell them this, that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst decisions. That love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. That home isn't a place you find. It's something you fight for, build yourself, and defend with everything you have. She'd tell them that she'd married a stranger before sunset, and it had been terrifying and reckless, and the beginning of everything good in her life. She'd tell them that their father had been hard and distant and had learned to love because she'd refused to accept anything less. She'd tell them that the ranch they lived on, the land they worked, the legacy they'd inherit, all of it had been built on the foundation of two people who'd made an impossible choice and then refused to let it break them. And she'd tell them the truth she'd learned in fire and blood and desperate hope. That you can't always choose your circumstances, but you can choose what you do with them. You can choose to fight, to build, to stay, to turn a bargain into a life and a stranger into family and a piece of contested land into home. That was the story, not a fairy tale, not a romance, just two imperfect people making impossible choices and somehow, against all odds, surviving them together. And in the end, that was enough.